It was early spring, the kind that makes you forget winter ever existed. The ocean outside my window looked soft again, calm and familiar, as if it was trying to remind me that peace still existed somewhere. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my morning coffee, the steam curling into the air like a quiet prayer. I had just finished watering my plants when the phone rang. It was one of those rings that feels heavier than it should, the kind that pulls something deep inside you. I reached for it, already sensing something wasn't right. "Mom?" My daughter's voice was distant, rushed. "Sweetheart," I said, smiling, "I've been waiting to hear from you. Your birthday's coming up." She cut me off with a sigh. "Mom, listen, I just wanted to let you know we got married." My hand froze around the mug. "Married?" "Yeah," she said quickly. "It was small, simple, just a few people who really matter." I swallowed. "I see. And when was this?" "Last week. Look, Mom, I don't want you to be upset, okay? It felt easier this way." "Easier for who?" I asked softly, though I already knew the answer. There was a pause, and then she said, almost irritated, "Mom, please don't start. It's not a big deal." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "You didn't think your mother might want to see you walk down the aisle?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't reach her heart. "Mom, stop being dramatic. It was just a ceremony. Anyway, we were hoping we could use the beach house for our honeymoon. For a couple of weeks." The words hit harder than I expected. That house, it wasn't just wood and windows. It was my life. The place where my husband and I spent our last summer together. Every wall still carried his laughter, every corner his touch. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the sunlight bouncing off the waves outside my window. "Mom? Did you hear me?" "I heard you," I said quietly. "When did you plan to tell me?" "Well, we're leaving Friday," she said. "So if you could just mail the keys, that would be perfect." I could hear her husband's voice in the background, low and impatient. She was distracted, speaking to me like I was a stranger asking too many questions. "Sweetheart," I said slowly, "I'm glad you found someone. I really am. But you didn't invite me to your wedding. You didn't even tell me. And now you want the one place that still feels like home to me." She sighed again. "Mom, please don't make this about you. You always do this." I almost smiled at the irony. She continued, "We just want to relax for a while, okay? You've got plenty of space there. It's not like you use it much anymore." Her words sliced through the years of sacrifice I had built my love on. For a moment, I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she could erase me so easily. But I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle inside me. A kind of stillness that comes when you realize the fight is over and the silence is stronger. "All right," I said finally. "I understand." "Good," she said quickly, relieved. "So, you'll send the keys?" "I'll take care of it," I said. "Don't worry." "Thanks, Mom," she said. Her tone softened slightly. "You're the best." Then the line went dead. I sat there, the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to the emptiness that followed. Outside, the seagulls circled above the water, calling to each other as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I looked around my kitchen. The old oak cabinets my husband built, the faded curtains my daughter once helped me hang, the family photos lining the wall. In every one of them, she was smiling beside me, and now she had built a life where I no longer existed. I got up slowly, walked to the window, and opened it. The ocean breeze carried the faint scent of salt and thyme. It reminded me of my husband, of promises whispered long ago when love still felt unbreakable. "Looks like it's just you and me again," I whispered to the sea. The gulls called back as if agreeing. I took another sip of coffee, now gone cold. Then I set the cup down and reached for the small wooden box on the shelf. Inside were my husband's watch, a faded photograph, and the beach house keys. I turned them over in my hand, the metal cool against my skin. For years, I had kept that house alive for her, for us. Every holiday, every summer, I told myself that one day she'd come home again, that we'd laugh like we used to. But that illusion had died the moment she said, "Only people who really matter." I could have cried then, but instead I smiled. A slow, tired smile that wasn't made of sadness, but of understanding. Some lessons don't need to be shouted. They can be taught in silence, written in the spaces between words. I went to my desk and pulled out an old notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single line. "This time, she will remember." Then I placed the keys beside it, closed the notebook, and set both on the table. The house was quiet, except for the rhythmic crash of waves outside. Each wave felt like a heartbeat, steady, relentless, alive. I didn't know what I would do yet. Not exactly. But I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let this betrayal turn me bitter. No, I'd let it turn me strong. I picked up the phone again and dialed a familiar number. "Hello, Mr. Harris," I said when my lawyer answered. "It's Alice. Yes, it's been a while. I need your help with something regarding my property." He asked what was going on, and I smiled faintly. "Let's just say," I replied, "it's time for a change of ownership." The pen was already in my hand before I hung up. Outside, the sea sparkled under the morning light, calm and endless, like it was keeping my secret. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely in control. The next morning, the ocean was covered in fog. From my porch, I could barely see the water, just the faint movement of waves pressing against the shore. It felt strange, like the world was holding its breath. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and stood there, listening to the quiet. I hadn't slept much the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. "We only invited people who really matter." The words rolled around in my mind like stones in a tide pool, smooth, sharp, impossible to ignore. I used to think distance would protect me from disappointment. I thought by giving her space, by not asking too many questions, I was doing the right thing. But maybe I'd been too quiet for too long. Maybe she mistook silence for weakness. The kettle whistled inside, breaking the stillness. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat at the table, the same spot where I had taken that phone call. The notebook I'd written in last night was still there, the lines staring back at me. This time, she will remember. The pen lay beside it. I ran my thumb over the ink mark at the top of the page, still wet in some spots. I didn't plan to get even. That wasn't my nature. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolved. I pulled out a folder from the drawer, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the original papers for the beach house. My husband and I had bought it 35 years ago, after saving every extra dollar we could. He used to say, "When I'm gone, you'll still have this place, Alice. It'll keep you safe." And he was right. That house had seen me through grief, loneliness, and the long nights that come when you're learning how to live alone. It had become my heartbeat. But now it was about to mean something else. I flipped through the documents, stopping when I reached the title deed. My name was printed clearly next to his, Alice and Thomas Merritt. I smiled faintly, tracing his name with my fingertip. Then I opened my phone and called the lawyer again. "Mr. Harris, it's me," I said. "Yes, I'd like to move forward. Can we meet this afternoon?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Of course, Alice. Same office?" "Yes, and please bring the transfer forms." When I hung up, I took a deep breath and looked around the room. The walls felt different today, less like a home, more like a chapter ending. I spent the morning gathering a few things. Family photos, old letters, the seashell lamp my husband had made years ago. Every item I touched carried a memory. Holidays, laughter, quiet mornings filled with coffee and sand between our toes. By noon, I was dressed and ready. The air outside was still cool, but the fog had begun to lift. The sunlight was breaking through in slow, patient streaks. As I drove into town, I caught a glimpse of the beach house in the distance, perched on the cliff like it was watching the world pass by. It looked small from the road, but I knew every inch of it by heart. The sound of the steps, the smell of salt in the curtains, the way the boards creaked in the hallway when the tide came in. At the lawyer's office, Mr. Harris greeted me with the same gentle smile he'd had since the day we first bought that house. "Alice, you look well," he said, motioning for me to sit. "Thank you," I replied. "I'm ready to make some changes." He looked over his glasses. "You're sure about this?" "Completely," I said. "It's time." I explained what I wanted, a transfer of ownership, not to my daughter, but to a charitable foundation, a small organization in town that helps single mothers rebuild their lives after hardship. It wasn't a coincidence. I wanted that house to hold women who had been forgotten, just like I had been. Mr. Harris blinked. "That's very generous of you, Alice. Are you certain you don't want to leave it to family?" I smiled. "Family is more than blood, Mr. Harris. Sometimes it's the people who show up when no one else does." He nodded slowly. "I'll prepare the paperwork. You can sign it this afternoon." I thanked him, and as I left the office, I felt lighter. Not happy, exactly, but free. Driving back home, the road curved along the cliffs. The sky had cleared completely now, the ocean sparkling under the sun. I pulled over for a moment, stepping out to watch the waves crash against the rocks. It was strange. Something that once symbolized pain now looked beautiful again. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen and started baking. It was something I hadn't done in months. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the house, wrapping around me like an old friend. By evening, I had a small stack of cookies cooling on the counter and a box sitting beside them. I lined it carefully with tissue paper and placed inside one of the cookies a small card and the old set of house keys. The card read, "For your honeymoon. I hope you find the peace you're looking for." It wasn't spite, it wasn't revenge. It was a quiet goodbye. I sealed the box, tied it with a ribbon, and placed it near the front door. Outside, the sky was turning pink. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the waves in gold and orange. I sat down on the porch steps, watching the colors shift. That's when my neighbor Helen walked by with her dog. "Evening, Alice," she said, smiling. "You've been quiet lately? Everything okay?" I nodded. "Just doing a bit of house cleaning, I suppose." She chuckled. "Spring cleaning already?" "Something like that." She waved and kept walking, and I watched her disappear down the street. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving only the rhythm of the waves and the creak of my old rocking chair. I thought about my daughter. About the little girl who used to run barefoot across that very porch, chasing seagulls and laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. I thought about how proud I'd been when she went to college, how my heart broke a little every time she called less and less. Maybe I'd loved her too much. Maybe I'd given her so much freedom that she forgot where she came from. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Some lessons are taught through presence, others through absence. When night fell, I turned off the porch light and went inside. I stood by the window looking out at the moon rising over the water. Its reflection shimmered like silver glass, steady and beautiful. On the table, the small box waited quietly, the ribbon catching the moonlight. I picked it up, feeling its weight. Not heavy, but meaningful. I whispered softly to myself, "She'll understand one day." Then I set it down again, next to the framed photo of my husband. He was smiling in the picture, holding our daughter when she was just a toddler. I could almost hear his voice, deep and steady, saying what he always used to. "You did good, Alice. You did what needed to be done." I smiled faintly. I hope so. The house was quiet, the sea calm again. I turned off the lights and went to bed, the sound of waves filling the room like a lullaby. Sleep came easily that night. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of what I'd lost, only of what I was about to set free. The morning after was crisp and bright, the kind of day that feels cleaner than it should. The air carried that faint, salty sweetness that only comes from the ocean. I woke up earlier than usual, before the gulls started their noisy patrol. I brewed coffee, opened the window, and let the air in. The house smelled like cinnamon and sea breeze, traces of last night's baking and something older like memory. The box was still on the table, wrapped in cream paper and tied with a thin white ribbon. It looked innocent, like something out of a holiday card. You would never guess what it meant. I touched the top of the box lightly, running my fingers over the ribbon. My husband had always told me that people show who they are not through big gestures, but through small ones, what they send, what they give, what they take. He used to say that a gift says more about the giver than about the receiver. He was right. After breakfast, I sat at my desk and finished writing the letter I'd started the night before. It was short, polite, and cold in a way that felt final. Dear Emily, I hope your honeymoon is everything you dreamed of. I've made some changes regarding the beach house. You'll find the details inside the enclosed envelope. Take care of each other. Love, Mom. No anger, no accusation, just words that would do their job. I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and slipped it under the ribbon of the gift box. I looked at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Goodbye, sweetheart." By the time I stepped outside, the sun was up, golden and clean. The ocean glittered in 1,000 shades of blue. I put the box on the passenger seat and started the car. The drive into town was quiet. The road wound along the cliffs, every turn revealing the water below, crashing and retreating in endless rhythm. A few fishermen were already out near the docks, and the small bakery on Main Street had just opened. The smell of fresh bread reached all the way to the stoplight. I passed the post office, then slowed when I saw the little white church on the hill. The bells had just finished ringing. It reminded me of her, my daughter at 12 years old, standing in front of that church with her hair braided, smiling shyly in her Sunday dress. I could almost hear her laughter echoing across the years. It felt like another life. I parked outside their building, the one she and her husband had just moved into. It wasn't far from the center of town, a tall, modern apartment complex with glass balconies and shiny steel doors. I carried the box up the short flight of steps and set it gently at their front door. For a moment, I stood there, hands still hovering above it. I wanted to knock. I wanted to see her face, even if just for a second. But then I heard voices inside, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. She was home and happy, and I was no part of it. So instead, I straightened my shoulders, turned, and walked away. The air felt heavier on the way back down the steps, but it wasn't sadness. It was release. I drove back home slowly, taking the long way along the shore. Every mile seemed to peel away another layer of hurt. By the time I reached the beach house, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I left the car in the driveway and walked straight to the back porch. The view stretched wide and endless, waves kissing the sand in lazy rhythm. I took off my shoes and stepped down to the water. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the tide licking gently at my toes. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I watched the gulls glide above the water, their wings cutting through sunlight. The horizon shimmered, endless, free, untouchable. I realized that's what I had wanted all along. Not revenge, not even recognition, just freedom. After a while, I went back inside, made another cup of coffee, and called Mr. Harris to confirm that everything had gone through. "It's done," he said. "The transfer is complete. The deed now belongs to the organization. I'll send you a copy for your records." "Thank you," I replied. He hesitated. "You know, Alice, not many people would do what you just did. They're worth giving away a home like that. It's rare." I smiled faintly. "It's not about the house," I said. "It's about what it represents. I want it to mean something again." There was a pause. Then he said, "You've got a good heart." I hung up and sat there for a long moment, watching the steam rise from my mug. The quiet felt softer now, not empty. Later that afternoon, I took out an old photo album and sat on the porch, flipping through it. There were pictures of Emily at every age. First birthday, first day of school, graduation. Her smile, her freckles, her wide brown eyes. Each photo a reminder of the years before everything became complicated. I closed the album slowly, pressing my palm against the cover. "You'll understand someday," I murmured. "You'll see that love doesn't mean saying yes to everything." The day passed quietly. I made soup for dinner, read for a while, and watched the sun disappear into the ocean. When night came, the air cooled, and the stars stretched out across the sky like glitter spilled on velvet. I went to bed early, the sound of waves outside my window steady and soothing. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" There was silence for a second, then a shaky voice. "Mom?" It was her. My chest tightened. "Emily?" Her voice cracked. You gave the house away?" I took a breath. "Yes, I did." "Why would you do that?" she said, her tone trembling between anger and disbelief. "You knew we wanted to stay there for our honeymoon." "I did," I said calmly, "but I also knew you didn't want me there. You made that clear." "That's not fair," she shouted. "You're punishing me." "No," I said softly. "I'm setting myself free." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, quick and uneven. Then, quietly, she said, "Dad would have never done that." I closed my eyes. "Your father built that house for love, Emily. Not for ownership. You can't understand that now, but one day you will." "Mom," her voice broke slightly, "we just wanted to enjoy it, that's all. You didn't have to be so cold." I smiled faintly, though my eyes burned. Sometimes being cold is the only way to stop being burned. She didn't respond. I heard her husband's voice in the background, harsh and impatient. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down slowly. The house felt heavier again, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was peace. The kind that comes after a storm, when the waves finally pull back and leave the sands smooth again. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the dunes. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and stepped outside. From the porch, I could see the lighthouse in the distance. Its light turned slowly, steady and patient, cutting through the gray sky. I thought about my daughter, about how love can twist itself into something unrecognizable when pride takes over. I didn't hate her. I couldn't, but I wouldn't let her break what was left of me either. I took a deep breath, letting the salt air fill my lungs. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was the turning point. This was the moment I stopped waiting for her to come home. And for the first time, that realization didn't hurt. It just settled. The sea rolled on, endless and eternal. The horizon didn't care who was right or wrong. It simply existed, the same as it always had. And as I stood there watching it, I realized something simple and powerful. Some endings aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to set you free. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up outside, shaking the old shutters against the windows. I lay there, listening to the familiar creaks of the house. Every sound seemed to echo the memories that lived inside these walls. I finally got up, wrapped my robe tighter around me, and went to the kitchen. The clock above the stove read 2:17 a.m. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the sink, watching the moonlight stretch across the countertop. For a moment, I thought about calling her again. But what would I even say? I'd already said everything that needed to be said, even in my silence. There was nothing left but the echo of choices, hers and mine. I walked to the living room, where the air smelled faintly of salt and old pine wood. On the mantel was the photograph of my husband, Thomas, in his fishing hat, smiling like he always did when he caught something small but acted as if it were record-breaking. "I hope you'd understand," I whispered, tracing his face with my eyes. "I just couldn't let her take it all. Not the way she wanted to." The photograph seemed to look back at me, patient, forgiving. When dawn finally arrived, I made myself another pot of coffee and stepped outside. The sky was painted in soft peach and pale blue, and the air was sharp enough to wake anyone from a dream. The sea looked calm again, stretching endlessly, as if nothing bad could ever happen here. But the peace didn't last long. By noon, there was a knock on my door. Sharp, impatient. I knew that knock before I even reached the handle. When I opened it, she was standing there. Emily. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her face red, eyes bright with tears and fury. Her husband stood a few steps behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Mom," she said, breathless, "you can't just give away the house." I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked. At the little girl I'd raised, now standing before me with anger where love used to live. "Come in," I said quietly. She stormed past me into the living room, her husband following close behind. "How could you do this?" she demanded. "That house is family property. You had no right." I closed the door slowly. "I had every right. It was mine and your father's, and now it belongs to women who actually need it." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You think I didn't need it? We planned our honeymoon there. You've ruined everything." I met her gaze steadily. "No, Emily, I just stopped letting you take everything for granted," her husband scoffed. "So this is about control, huh? About power?" I turned to him calmly. "No, it's about respect. Something both of you seem to have forgotten." He took a step forward, his tone harsh. "Do you even know what you've done? We had plans." "I know," I interrupted softly. "You had plans for something that wasn't yours." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost physical. Emily's lower lip trembled. "You're unbelievable," she whispered. "You're punishing me for not inviting you to the wedding." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You punished yourself the moment you decided I didn't matter." Her eyes flashed. "You're twisting everything." "I don't need to twist anything," I said. "The truth stands on its own." She looked around the room, her gaze darting over the pictures on the wall, the shelves her father built, the little trinkets from our vacations together. Her anger faltered for just a second. I saw something flicker in her expression. Guilt, maybe. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. Her husband stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We should go," he muttered. "This is pointless." Emily didn't move. "You gave away the only thing Dad left us," she said. "How could you?" I took a deep breath. "He left you love, Emily. Memories, a name that means something. If that's not enough, no house in the world will fill that hole. She turned her face away, biting back tears. I can't believe you did this to me. I didn't do it to you, I said softly. I did it for myself. Her husband grabbed her arm. We're done here. Before they left, I called out one last time. Emily. She stopped at the door, her back still turned. Someday, I said, you'll understand why peace was worth more to me than pride. She didn't look back. The door shut hard behind them, and the sound lingered in the air long after they'd gone. I stood there, staring at that closed door, feeling every bit of the silence that followed. Then I walked to the window and watched their car pull out of the driveway, the taillights glowing red against the pale sand road. When the sound of the engine faded, I sat down on the couch, folded my hands in my lap, and just breathed. It was done. I thought I'd feel regret, but instead there was only stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after the last page of a long, difficult chapter. Later that afternoon, I drove to the edge of town to visit the charity office, the new owners of the beach house. The small sign by the door read, Haven for Women and Children. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and hope. A young woman greeted me warmly. You must be Mrs. Merritt, she said. We just received the paperwork this morning. I can't tell you how grateful we are. I smiled. It's yours now. Use it well. She hesitated. Would you like to see it one last time before we move in? I thought about it for a moment. No, I said finally. I've already said my goodbye. As I left, she handed me a thank you note. The handwriting was neat and careful. You've given more than a house. You've given a future. The words warmed something inside me. I drove home slowly, the wind pulling through my hair as I rolled down the window. The sea glittered in the afternoon sun, wide and forgiving. When I reached the house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch. The same steps my daughter used to play on, the same porch my husband used to mend every spring. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. I took out my journal and began to write. Not about loss, not about anger, but about clarity. About learning that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go, even when your heart still aches. The sky turned orange as the sun began to set. I wrote one final line before closing the notebook. The house will be full of laughter again, just not mine, and that's all right. When darkness finally fell, I went inside, turned off the lights, and stood by the window watching the waves roll in. Outside, the ocean kept its rhythm, steady, endless, eternal. And in that quiet, I realized I hadn't lost a daughter. I had simply found myself again. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. The house, once filled with echoes of arguments and memories, now felt like a place that was finally breathing again. The air was lighter somehow. Even the walls seemed to sigh in relief. I kept busy. I cleaned the kitchen cabinets, sorted old letters, folded away linens that hadn't been touched in years. There's something healing about order, about putting small things back where they belong when the bigger things in life have fallen apart. On the third morning after Emily's visit, I went into town for groceries. The clerk at the small market smiled at me the way people do when they've heard something through the grapevine but don't want to say it out loud. I just smiled back. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. On the drive back, the radio played an old song that my husband used to hum when fixing the boat. The House by the Sea. I laughed under my breath. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. When I pulled into my driveway, there was a single envelope resting on the front steps. My name was written on it in familiar handwriting. I froze for a second, staring at it. Emily's handwriting. I picked it up, feeling the weight of her words before I even opened it. Inside was a short note. Mom, I don't understand you anymore. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but I hope someday you realize how much this hurt me. Emily. There was no love, Emily. No warmth, just that flat tone of distance. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. Then I sat down with my tea and stared at the ocean for a long time. The waves were small that day, lazy and forgiving. Her pain didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how calm I felt reading it. I didn't feel the urge to defend myself or explain. I didn't even feel guilt. Maybe because, for the first time, I wasn't reacting out of emotion. I was responding out of understanding. I thought about calling her, but I didn't. Not yet. That evening, I received another call, this time from the young woman at the charity foundation. "Mrs. Merritt," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement, "we've moved in. The first families will arrive next week. We're painting the walls today. You should see it. It already feels like home." Something in my chest loosened. "That's wonderful," I said. She hesitated before continuing. "We'd love for you to come by when it's ready. Maybe cut the ribbon for the opening?" I smiled to myself. Maybe. We'll see. After the call, I walked outside and watched the sunset. The horizon was streaked with purple and gold, the kind of light that makes everything seem softer. I thought about the house, my old house, now filled with laughter I'd never hear, voices I'd never meet. And for once, the thought didn't sting. It felt right. Later that night, I took out an old photo album again. This time I stopped at a picture of Emily as a child. She was sitting on the porch steps, hair tangled from the wind, holding a seashell up to her ear. "I can hear the ocean, Mom," she had shouted back then, eyes full of wonder. I ran my fingers over that photo. "You used to listen," I whispered. "Somewhere along the way, you stopped." A tear slipped down, not of sadness, but of mourning for what could have been. Then I closed the album and placed it gently back on the shelf. The next morning, I decided to take a walk on the beach. The sand was cold beneath my feet, but the air was crisp and alive. As I walked, I saw a few children building sandcastles near the dunes, their laughter carried by the wind. I smiled. I remembered building those same castles with Emily once upon a time. When I reached the edge of the tide, I bent down and picked up a smooth piece of driftwood, small and round like a coin. I slipped it into my pocket, a reminder that even things tossed and broken by the sea can become beautiful again. On my way back, I ran into Helen, my neighbor. She waved from her porch, her dog barking excitedly at my feet. "Morning, Alice," she called. "You're glowing today." I laughed. "Maybe it's just the salt air." She walked closer, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "So how's your daughter? Everything all right?" I hesitated. "We're finding our way." She nodded, a knowing look crossing her face. "Sometimes the only way forward is through distance." "Maybe," I said softly. "But distance can be its own kind of peace." Helen smiled. "You always did have a way with words." After she left, I stood there for a long time, watching the waves roll in again. I realized that for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of waiting for a call, for forgiveness, for someone to understand me. The waiting was over. That night, I cooked dinner for one. Roasted vegetables, a bit of grilled fish, a glass of wine. I lit a candle and played soft music from the old radio on the counter. The song that came on was "You'll Never Walk Alone," my husband's favorite. As I ate, I looked around the small kitchen. It was simple, but warm. Everything in it was chosen, kept, or cleaned by my own hands. There was something sacred about that. About building a life no one could take from me again. When I finished, I took the dishes to the sink and washed them slowly, the way I used to when Emily was little and would tell me about her day. I could almost hear her small voice again, the way she used to say, "Mom, do you think the sea ever gets tired?" And I'd told her, "No, sweetheart. The sea doesn't get tired. It just keeps moving." Now, standing there alone, I realized that was true for me too. Later, before bed, I sat at my desk and wrote another letter. This time not to Emily, but to myself. "Dear Alice, you did not fail. You simply stopped carrying what wasn't yours to carry. You let go with love, and that is enough." I folded the note, slipped it into my journal, and turned off the lamp. The moonlight streamed through the window, falling across the floor in soft silver lines. As I crawled into bed, I whispered to the dark, "Tomorrow will be lighter." And for once, I believed it. The following morning, I woke up to the sound of the ocean again. Calm, steady, forgiving. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing against my face, and looked toward the horizon. The sun was rising, spilling light over the waves, turning everything gold. It struck me that this was how healing worked. Not all at once, but in quiet, patient layers. I smiled to myself, whispering the same words I used to say to Emily when she was little. "It's a new day, sweetheart. The world hasn't stopped turning yet, and neither had I." A week passed quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. The mornings came softer, the coffee tasted warmer, and even the gulls seemed to cry a little less. My world had shrunk down to something simple again. Just me, the sea, and the steady rhythm of ordinary days. The charity called on a Thursday. The same young woman, her voice bright and full of something I hadn't heard in my house for years. Joy. Mrs. Merritt, we've finished the renovations. The rooms are ready, the kitchen is stocked, and we're welcoming the first families this weekend. I could almost see her smiling through the phone. That's wonderful, I said, my voice calm but sincere. She hesitated. Would you really not like to visit? Even once? I looked out toward the horizon. The sunlight shimmered on the water like tiny pieces of glass. I thought about the walls of that beach house, now repainted, filled with voices again. Different voices, but still human and alive. No, I said softly. It's their home now. That's enough. We said our goodbyes, and when I hung up, I sat for a long time just listening to the ocean. The wind pushed gently at the curtains, bringing in that familiar salt smell. I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time since Thomas passed, I felt him near, not as a ghost, but as a warmth in the air, a quiet approval. Later that afternoon, I walked to town for a few errands. The streets were slow, lined with small shops and the same faces I'd known for decades. People waved, asked how I was doing. I told them the truth. Better. At the corner cafe, Helen spotted me from her table. Alice, come join me, she called, waving me over. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd sat across from someone, shared silence that wasn't heavy. I ordered a tea, and we talked about simple things, the weather, her garden, her dog's new trick. At one point, she leaned in, lowering her voice. I heard you gave the beach house away. I didn't flinch. I did. Her eyes widened slightly. You're braver than I could ever be. I smiled. Maybe it's not bravery. Maybe it's just finally choosing peace. She nodded slowly. Peace looks good on you, Alice. That night, when I came home, the house greeted me like an old friend. The porch light flickered on as I unlocked the door. The familiar smell of lavender and lemon drifted from the candles I'd left burning. Everything was still, but not lonely. I made myself soup, simple but comforting, and ate by the window while watching the waves glow under the moonlight. When I was done, I cleaned the bowl, wiped down the counter, and put everything back in its place. The rhythm of it, wash, dry, return, was its own kind of prayer. Then, just as I was about to turn in for the night, the phone rang again. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Mom. Her voice was quiet this time, small. I sat down slowly. Hi, Emily. For a moment, all I heard was breathing, hers uneven, mine steady. Mom, she said again, barely above a whisper, I went to the house today. My heart gave one slow thud. Oh? It's different, she continued. There are people there. Kids. They were painting seashells on the porch railing. I closed my eyes. I could picture it. Yes, I said softly. It belongs to them now. Her voice trembled. I didn't understand, Mom. I was so angry. I thought you were being cruel. And now? Pause. Then she said, Now I think I see what you meant. You didn't give it away to hurt me. You gave it to make something good out of what we broke. I didn't trust myself to speak. Those kids, Mom, she continued, her voice cracking. They called me Miss when I walked by. They were laughing. I could hear music coming from the kitchen. It felt alive. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. That's what your father wanted, I whispered. He built that house to hold love. I just made sure it kept doing that. She sniffled. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. For the wedding. For the words I said. I didn't realize how much I was becoming like... Stop, I said gently. There's no need to explain. We all learn the hard way. Silence stretched between us, soft this time, not heavy. I want to come see you, she said finally. If that's okay. I took a long breath, my fingers trembling slightly on the receiver. The door's always open, I said. Always has been. Tomorrow, she asked, voice small again. Tomorrow, I said. When I hung up, I sat there in the quiet, tears still clinging to my lashes. Outside, the sea was dark and endless, but the moonlight laid a silver path across it, clear and straight. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I set the kettle on the stove, laid out 2 cups instead of 1, and put fresh flowers on the table. It felt like a ritual I'd been waiting years to perform. When the knock finally came, I took a breath before opening the door. There she was. My daughter. She looked different, older, softer somehow. Her eyes were red from crying, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her own guilt. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms. She stiffened at first, then melted, the way she used to when she was small and frightened of storms. I missed you, she whispered against my shoulder. I know, I said. I missed you too. When we finally sat down, I poured her tea and we talked. Not about blame or loss, just about life. Her job, her husband. Small, ordinary things that felt extraordinary because they were ours again. At one point, she glanced at the flowers on the table. You still grow his favorites, she said, smiling faintly. Every spring, I said. He wouldn't forgive me if I didn't. We both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that releases something inside you. Hours passed like minutes. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. Mom? Yes, sweetheart? Do you ever regret giving it away? I thought for a moment. No, I said honestly, because I didn't lose it. I let it live somewhere else. She nodded, eyes glistening. You're stronger than I thought. I smiled. I just learned to stop mistaking silence for weakness. She hugged me again, longer this time. Then she whispered, Dad would be proud of you. When she left, I stood at the window watching her car disappear down the road. The morning sun spilled over everything, the sand, the water, the house that was still mine in every way that mattered. I picked up my journal and wrote one last line for the day. Sometimes to heal a wound, you have to stop covering it. Let the light in, and it will close on its own. Then I set down my pen, poured myself another cup of tea, and sat quietly as the tide rolled in. The world outside sparkled, alive again, and so was I. The next few days felt lighter than any I'd known in years. The air in the house carried a new warmth, not from the heater, but from something softer, more human. There was laughter again, faint and hesitant, the kind that fills a home only after forgiveness has cracked open the silence. Emily started visiting often after that morning. Sometimes she came with coffee from the cafe in town, sometimes she just showed up without calling. I never asked why. I didn't need to. Some things don't need to be said out loud when a mother and daughter are trying to find their way back to each other. On her third visit, she brought flowers, white tulips, my favorite. I wasn't sure what you liked anymore, she said, setting them on the counter. I've always liked these, I said. You used to pick them for me on Mother's Day, remember? Her eyes softened. I remember. We stood there quietly for a moment, the sound of the waves filling the pause. Over the next week, our conversations grew longer, easier. We didn't talk much about the house or what had happened. Instead, we talked about the present. Her new job, the book I was reading, the small things that make up an ordinary life. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the tide roll in, she turned to me and said, I went back to the beach house again. I looked at her, but said nothing. There were children there, she continued. One of the women said she hasn't had a safe place to stay in years. She called it a miracle. I felt my throat tighten. It was never just a house, I said quietly. It was supposed to hold love. Emily nodded, blinking back tears. I think I understand that now. For the first time, I saw my daughter not as the angry woman who had hurt me, but as the child she used to be. Still learning, still reaching. She glanced at me, hesitant. Do you hate me for what I did? I turned to her fully, the sunlight touching her face. No, sweetheart, I said. I was hurt, deeply. But hate? No, hate doesn't live here anymore. She wiped her cheek and laughed softly, half embarrassed. You always were better at forgiveness than I was. I had to be, I said. Otherwise it would have swallowed me whole. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and grass. We sat there until the sky turned gold, the waves glimmering like spilled honey. When she left that evening, she hugged me longer than usual. I watched her car disappear again, but this time, I didn't feel the same emptiness. I felt something rebuilding, slow, fragile, but real. That night, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the sea. The moonlight traced silver lines across the water, and the rhythmic crash of waves felt almost like breathing. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone inside this house. The next morning, Helen came by with her usual energy and gossip. So, she said with a grin, I saw your daughter's car outside again yesterday. You two patching things up? I smiled. One cup of tea at a time, Helen chuckled. That's how it starts. You always said patience was your best virtue. Maybe it's finally paying off, I said. She gave me a small package before she left. Homemade blueberry muffins wrapped in a napkin. For when she comes by next time, she said. After she left, I placed the muffins on the table and brewed fresh coffee, letting the house fill with the smell. The sunlight poured through the curtains, and I realized how different it looked now. Not just brighter, but alive again. Later that day, Emily called. "Mom," she said, "would it be okay if I came by this weekend? Maybe brought Daniel?" Her husband's name felt strange in my ears. Not bitter anymore, just distant. "Of course," I said. "I'll make something sweet." "Cookies?" she asked, laughing a little. "You still remember." That Saturday, they arrived just after noon. I was nervous, though I tried not to show it. Daniel was polite but cautious, standing awkwardly near the doorway. I could tell he didn't know what to expect. "Come in," I said gently. "No ghosts here." He smiled weakly. "Thank you, Mrs. Merritt." "Please," I said, "it's just Alice." They sat in the living room and I brought out lemonade and cookies. For a while, the conversation stayed safe. Weather, work, small jokes. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Mayor, Alice," he said. "I said things I shouldn't have. I didn't understand." I looked at him for a long moment. "Understanding takes time," I said. "It's never too late to start." He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Emily reached for his hand and something in my heart loosened. Maybe the anger that had once built a wall between us was finally starting to crumble. After they left, I walked outside to the porch and sat down. The sea breeze was soft, carrying laughter from a few children playing on the shore. I thought of the women and kids now living in the beach house, the new laughter filling those rooms, the new life growing there. It struck me then how everything I'd done, every hard choice had led to this. Peace not just for me, but for others too. The following week, I visited the charity for the first time. The young woman, Sarah, greeted me with that same bright smile. "Mrs. Merritt, you came." She showed me around. The walls were painted in soft colors, seafoam green, pale yellow, and the sound of children's laughter echoed down the hall. In one of the bedrooms, a woman sat reading to her daughter. "This is beautiful," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded. "It's more than a shelter. It's a home." When I walked out onto the porch, I stopped for a long time. The railing had been decorated with seashells, hundreds of them, painted in bright colors by little hands. A small wooden sign hung from one of the posts. "Thank you, Mrs. M." Tears welled in my eyes, but they didn't fall. They stayed there, shimmering with gratitude. I stood there for a while, breathing in the sea air, the laughter, the life that pulsed around me. And in that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. When I drove home that afternoon, I rolled down the window and let the wind rush in. The sun was setting again, spilling its golden light across the road ahead. I whispered to myself, "Thomas, I did it. The house is still full of love." And though the air was still, I could have sworn I felt a gentle warmth on my shoulder, like a hand resting there, proud, steady, and familiar. That night, as I wrote in my journal, I didn't write about loss or regret. I wrote about renewal, about how life has a way of giving back what you thought you'd lost, just in a different form. Sometimes, I wrote, you don't get back what you gave, but you find something better, peace. The waves outside hummed their endless song, the same one they'd sung through every season of my life. And as the moon rose high above the water, I whispered one final thought before closing my journal. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without pain. The next morning arrived with a kind of quiet light that made everything look new. I woke before sunrise, the way I always did when something inside me was shifting. The ocean outside was soft and gray, its rhythm calm and certain. I brewed my coffee and carried the cup to the porch, wrapping my shawl around my shoulders. For a long time, I just sat there, watching the light crawl across the water. My mind drifted to Emily again. Her visits, her apologies, the way she'd started showing up just to sit in silence. There was something healing in that, something familiar that reminded me of how we used to be before life tangled us up. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. It was Sarah from the charity house. "Mrs. Merritt," she said, her voice full of warmth. "We're holding a small open house next week, a thank you gathering. We'd love for you to come. Everyone wants to meet you properly." I hesitated, fingers tapping the rim of my coffee mug. "You don't need to thank me," I said softly. "Oh, but we want to," she insisted. "You gave this community more than you realize. Please, it would mean a lot." Her words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "All right," I said finally. "I'll be there." After the call, I sat still for a moment, listening to the wind rustling through the dune grass. I could almost hear Thomas's voice in it, that gentle hum he used to make when he was pleased. "Go," he seemed to say. "Go see what love built." The days that followed were quiet, peaceful, in a way that filled the house instead of hollowing it. Emily stopped by one evening after work, her hair still damp from the rain. She held up a bag with takeout boxes. "Thought you might not feel like cooking tonight," she said with a grin. "I never say no to food I didn't have to make," I teased. We ate by the window, the scent of rain and soy sauce mixing in the air. She told me about her job, her husband, the little things they were trying to fix between them. I listened, nodded, and smiled in the right places. At one point, she looked at me and said quietly, "You know, I used to think you were impossible to understand." "And now?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She smiled softly. "Now I think I just wasn't old enough to try." Her words lingered long after she left. Maybe that's how life worked. People come back not when you need them, but when they're finally ready to see you as human. The following week, I dressed early for the open house. I wore my best navy coat and the silver pendant Thomas had given me on our 10th anniversary. When I arrived, the small parking lot near the beach house was already full. The sight stopped me cold. The place looked so different. The paint was fresh, the shutters a soft sea green. There were flower boxes under every window and wind chimes hanging by the porch that caught the morning light. Children ran along the path, laughing. A few women stood near the entrance, chatting and smiling. And there, on the porch rail, I saw them, the seashells. Still there, still bright, catching the sunlight just like hope does when it finally returns. Sarah spotted me and waved. "Mrs. Merritt, you came." She led me inside. The rooms smelled of lemon and salt, clean, alive. The old furniture had been refinished, the floors gleamed. Photos of the families now living there lined the hallway. I paused at one picture, a woman sitting on the porch steps with her son asleep on her shoulder. Both were smiling. I felt something rise in my throat, a mixture of pride and peace. "Would you like to say a few words?" Sarah asked. "Oh, I don't know about that," I said, shaking my head. But before I could refuse again, a small crowd had gathered. The women, the children, a few volunteers. They clapped softly, encouraging me forward. I smiled, embarrassed, but stepped closer anyway. "I'm not much of a speaker," I began, "but I just want to say this house was built on love. It saw laughter, tears, and everything in between. My husband and I built it to be a home, not just a structure. And now, it's that again. That's all I ever wanted." The group clapped again, and I felt my cheeks warm. A few of the children handed me handmade cards. Crayon drawings of the house, hearts, waves, and the words, "Thank you, Mrs. M," written in uneven letters. When I stepped outside after, Emily was waiting by my car. "I didn't know you were coming," I said, surprised. She smiled shyly. "Sarah invited me. I wanted to see it too." We stood side by side, watching the children play in the yard. One of them ran up and handed her a seashell painted gold. "For you," the little girl said. Emily knelt down, smiling. "Thank you, sweetheart." Then she turned to me, holding up the shell. "You see, Mom, even your house still gives gifts." I laughed softly. "I think it always will." We drove home together that afternoon. The car windows were rolled down, the sea wind tangled in our hair. There was no need for words, just the hum of the road and the ocean beside us. When we reached my house, she didn't rush off like she used to. Instead, she followed me to the porch and sat beside me. The sky was turning pink, the first stars beginning to show. "I never asked," she said suddenly. "How did you know that giving the house away was the right thing to do?" I thought for a moment before answering. "Because holding on was hurting too much," I said. "And love, real love, doesn't hurt. It lets go when it needs to." She was quiet, then nodded slowly. "I'm glad you did it," she whispered. "It brought you back to me." That night, after she left, I stayed outside long after the light had faded. The ocean was dark, but calm, the waves folding into each other like a steady heartbeat. I went inside, lit a single candle on the table, and opened my journal. "The past doesn't disappear," I wrote. "It softens. It reshapes itself until it fits beside peace instead of pain." As the flame flickered, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The betrayal, the anger, the silence, the forgiveness. It all felt like pieces of one long tide, washing in and out until what remained was smooth enough to hold. I closed the journal and blew out the candle. The house settled around me, quiet and safe. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of children's laughter echoed faintly through the night wind. Carried from the beach house, maybe? Or maybe just a memory returning home. And as I drifted towards sleep, I whispered into the darkness, "It's all right now." Because it was. A few weeks passed after the open house, and life settled into a gentle rhythm again. The sea breeze had grown warmer, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine and salt. Each morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across my kitchen table, and for the first time in years, that sight made me smile without effort. Emily called often now. Sometimes it was about nothing at all. A recipe she'd tried, a funny story from work, a memory that had suddenly come back to her. The distance between us had faded into something softer, something that felt like the way it used to be before life hardened us both. One morning she called while I was out tending the garden. "Mom, guess what?" she said, her voice bright. "We're expecting." I froze, pruning shears still in my hand. "Expecting?" She laughed nervously. "Yes, Mom. You're going to be a grandmother." For a moment, the world went still. The garden around me blurred. I had imagined hearing those words one day, but not like this. Not after everything we'd gone through. Yet now, here they were, simple and full of life. "Oh, Emily," I whispered. That's wonderful news." "You sound shocked," she teased. "I am," I admitted, laughing softly. "But it's the good kind of shock." She told me about the doctor's visit, about how Daniel nearly fainted when he heard the heartbeat. Her excitement was infectious. I could hear something new in her voice. When the call ended, I sat down on the porch steps, the afternoon light dancing through the trees. The world seemed brighter somehow. Maybe this was life's way of showing me that love, even fractured, always finds its way back. Over the next few days, I started knitting again. My hands were slower than they used to be, but the rhythm came back easily. I picked soft yellow yarn, warm, gender-neutral, hopeful. Each stitch felt like a quiet prayer for the little life about to enter the world. A week later, Emily came by. She looked radiant in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child, light in her eyes, color in her cheeks. She carried a folder of sonogram pictures and laid them gently on the table. "Meet your grandbaby," she said, smiling. I looked at the blurry image, the tiny form floating in its small world. "Beautiful," I whispered. "Already beautiful." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I wanted you to be the first to know," she said, "before we tell anyone else." That simple sentence undid me. I felt tears rising but didn't fight them. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said softly. "You don't know how much that means." She smiled shyly. "I think I do." After she left, I sat with the sonogram photos spread out before me, the late afternoon light turning them golden. For so long, the word family had felt heavy, broken, complicated. But now it felt whole again. Maybe not perfect, but whole. Later that evening, I wrote in my journal, "Love doesn't return in the same form it left. It comes back softer, wiser, and wrapped in new beginnings." The next morning, I baked a batch of blueberry muffins and brought them to the charity house. The women there greeted me like an old friend. The children ran up, hugging my legs, their laughter filling the air. "Mrs. M," one little boy shouted, "we planted flowers." He pointed proudly toward the side of the house, where tiny shoots of daisies poked through the soil. "They're perfect," I said, smiling. Sarah joined me on the porch. "We've started a small garden out back," she said. "Something for the kids to take care of. It's been good for them." "It's good for everyone," I said. "Things grow better when you care for them." She nodded, her eyes warm. "You've changed a lot of lives, Mrs. Merritt." I looked out at the children, the sunlight gleaming off their hair. "They've changed mine too," I said. That night, back home, I sat on the porch again, watching the waves break against the shore. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from somewhere down the beach, maybe from the new families living in my old house. It didn't hurt to think of it anymore. It just felt right. As I rocked gently in my chair, I thought of Thomas. "You'd be proud of her," I whispered to the night. "And of me too, maybe." The stars above shimmered brighter, as if answering. Over the following weeks, Emily came by more often. Sometimes she brought her husband, sometimes just herself. One afternoon, she surprised me with a small gift, a framed photo of the two of us from years ago, back when she was in high school. We were laughing. arms around each other, wind blowing our hair in every direction. "I found it while cleaning out old boxes," she said. "I thought it belonged here." I traced the glass with my finger. "It never stopped belonging here," I said. She smiled, then hesitated. "Mom, I've been thinking." "About what?" "About the beach house," she said. "Would it be okay if, when the baby's old enough, I took them there? Just to see it?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Of course," I said. "That house was never mine alone. It belongs to everyone who needs it, including you." Her eyes softened. "Thank you, Mom." We sat there for a while after that, listening to the waves. The sunset painted everything in gold and rose. It was one of those rare moments where time felt suspended, past and present folding neatly into each other. When she left that evening, I walked her to her car. She turned back once, smiling. "I love you, Mom," she said. It was the first time she'd said those words in years. "I love you too," I replied, my voice steady but full. After she drove away, I went back to the porch and sat in the fading light. The ocean shimmered like liquid silver, endless and forgiving. Inside, the phone rang. It was Sarah again. "Mrs. Merritt," she said, "we're planning a small ceremony next month to honor donors who made the house possible. Would you let us name something after you?" I laughed softly. "Oh, I don't need that. But we want to," she said. "Maybe the garden. We were thinking of calling it Merritt's Garden." I paused, smiling. "That's lovely," I said. "But make sure the kids keep it wild. Gardens shouldn't be too perfect." When the call ended, I sat for a long while, feeling the soft hum of contentment in my chest. Everything I'd lost had found a new shape. Everything I'd given away had come back in a different form, fuller, freer. Before bed, I wrote again in my journal. I used to think love was about holding on. Now I know it's about creating space, for others, for healing, for life to bloom again. I closed the book, turned off the light, and lay there listening to the sound of the sea. The rhythm of the waves matched my heartbeat. Steady, forgiving, eternal. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep smiling. The following month arrived quietly, bringing with it a warm breeze and skies so clear they seemed almost painted. The days stretched long and golden, filled with the smell of blooming lilacs and sea salt drifting through the air. Life had settled into something beautifully ordinary again. I'd found comfort in routine. The morning coffee on the porch, my afternoon walks along the beach, the letters I sometimes wrote to Thomas even though I never mailed them. It wasn't grief anymore that brought me to write, just habit. A conversation that continued even across the invisible line between this world and the next. Emily's visits had become a part of that rhythm too. She'd come over once or twice a week, always carrying something, a bag of groceries, new baby pictures, or simply her laughter. She was showing again now, a small, perfect curve beneath her loose dresses. "Mom," she said one day, setting her purse on the counter, "I can feel them kick." Her eyes were bright, full of the same wonder I'd once seen when she was a little girl discovering seashells for the first time. I smiled, moving closer. "Can I?" She took my hand and placed it gently on her belly. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then a faint flutter, like a whisper against my palm. "There," she said softly. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. "That's life," I whispered. "That's your father's laugh in there." "My stubbornness too, I bet." Emily laughed. "Then we're in for trouble." We both did. The kind of laughter that fills every corner of a house and lingers long after it stops. As the weeks passed, she started helping me in the garden again. We planted marigolds and basil, the same way she and Thomas used to when she was small. Her movements were slower now, but peaceful. Watching her, I realized that sometimes love returns to us not as a person or an apology, but as the quiet miracle of seeing someone heal right in front of you. One afternoon, while we were pruning roses, she looked up and said, "Mom, did you ever think we'd end up here? You and me?" I glanced toward the sea, where the sunlight glittered against the waves. "I hoped," I said. "Even when I thought it was impossible, I hoped." She smiled faintly. "You always do that. You keep believing in people, even when they don't deserve it." "Maybe that's just what mothers do," I said. A few days later, I received a formal invitation in the mail, the ceremony Sarah had mentioned. It was handwritten, sealed with a soft blue ribbon. "Join us as we dedicate Merritt's Garden, a place where love continues to grow." When I read those words, something inside me ached in the most beautiful way. I'd given that house away to start over, but now it was giving something back. A legacy that wasn't about ownership, but meaning. The ceremony was set for a Sunday afternoon. The weather was perfect. Sunlight draped over the water, the air filled with the scent of freshly cut grass. Emily came with me, her hand resting gently on her stomach as she walked beside me. Daniel followed, quieter than usual, his arm resting lightly around her shoulders. When we arrived, a small crowd had gathered. There were children playing near the porch, women chatting with volunteers, and a few reporters taking photos. Sarah stood near the garden, her smile radiant as she saw us approach. "Mrs. Merritt," she said warmly, taking my hand. "You being here means the world." I looked around. The garden had grown even more than I'd imagined, rows of colorful flowers, herbs, and small plaques with names etched into them. But at the center stood one larger stone, simple and graceful. It read, "Merritt's Garden, a home for hope, built with love." My breath caught. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Sarah touched my arm. "Would you like to say something?" I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my strength, but something told me this was a moment worth finding the words for. So I stepped forward, my hands trembling slightly. The wind carried the faint cry of gulls overhead. "When my husband and I built our home," I began, "we thought it would be where our story stayed. But I've learned that sometimes the places we love the most aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be shared." I looked around, meeting the eyes of the women, the children, and my daughter standing at the edge of the crowd. "This garden," I continued, "was once part of a house that carried both joy and pain. But now it's something else, a space where new stories begin. And that's what love does. It begins again, even when you think it's over." The crowd was quiet for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. I stepped back, overwhelmed but smiling. Emily came to my side, her hand finding mine. "That was beautiful, Mom." I squeezed her hand gently. "You made it possible." Later, as the sun dipped lower, children handed out small paper butterflies attached to strings. Each one had a message written inside. Words of gratitude, wishes, or memories. One little girl approached me shyly and offered hers. "For you," she said. I opened it. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for giving us a home. I sleep without fear now." I blinked back tears. "That's the best thank you I've ever had," I whispered. After the ceremony, we stayed a while longer, watching the children play among the flowers. Emily sat on a bench near the garden, one hand on her belly, the other shading her eyes from the light. She looked peaceful, truly peaceful. "Mom," she said suddenly, her voice soft, "I think I want to name the baby Thomas, if it's a boy." My throat tightened. "That would have made your father very proud." "And if it's a girl," she continued, smiling faintly, "Alice?" I laughed through my tears. "Now that would make me cry." She reached over, taking my hand. "You've taught me more about love than anyone else ever could. I want our child to carry that." The world seemed to still in that moment. The sea, the laughter, the wind, everything folded into something sacred. When the ceremony ended, Sarah handed me a small pot of lavender from the garden. "A piece of home to take with you," she said. That night, after Emily and Daniel dropped me off, I placed the lavender on my windowsill. Its scent filled the room as I sat down to write again. "Today," I wrote, "I learned that love is not what we lose. It's what we pass on. The house is no longer mine, but the love that built it will outlive us all." As I set the pen down, I looked toward the ocean. The waves shimmered under the moonlight, endless and forgiving, the way life always seems when you finally made peace with it. And for the first time, I whispered into the night, "Thank you, Thomas, we did it." The air was still, the stars reflected on the water, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice again. Not in words, but in the steady hum of the sea. It wasn't goodbye, it was just another beginning. A few weeks passed after the ceremony, and life found a gentle rhythm again. The lavender Sarah had given me bloomed perfectly on the windowsill, filling the kitchen with its calm scent. Every time the wind blew through the open window, it carried that smell through the whole house. Soft, sweet, peaceful. I began to notice how quiet the days had become, but not in the lonely way they used to be. It was a quiet full of meaning now, like the pause between waves, the kind that lets you breathe. Emily visited often. Her belly was rounder now, her steps slower. Each time she walked through the door, she brought a warmth with her that made the whole place feel alive again. Sometimes she'd sit at the kitchen table while I cooked, her hands resting on her stomach as we talked. One morning she arrived earlier than usual, glowing and breathless. "Mom," she said, laughing, "the baby's kicking so hard. I think they're trying to get out early." I smiled, wiping my hands on a towel. "Maybe they're just impatient, like their mother." She rolled her eyes playfully. "Like their grandmother, you mean?" We both laughed. We spent the morning baking, blueberry muffins, my husband's favorite. The scent filled the house, wrapping us in memory. When the first batch came out of the oven, Emily bit into one and sighed. "I haven't had these since Dad passed," she said softly. "They taste like home." Her words caught me off guard. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's exactly what I wanted," I said, "for something to still taste like home." After lunch, she dozed off on the couch, her head resting against a pillow I'd embroidered years ago. I watched her sleep, her breathing slow and steady, and felt something deep inside me settle. My daughter, the same little girl who used to curl up beside me when thunderstorms scared her, was now about to become a mother herself. Time, I realized, has a way of circling back to where love began. That evening, after she left, I walked down to the beach. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath my feet. I let the waves wash over my ankles, their rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. In the distance, the lights from the charity house flickered faintly, a warm glow against the dark horizon. I thought of all the women there, all the children sleeping safely inside. The idea that something I once gave up now sheltered them filled me with a quiet kind of joy. It reminded me that sometimes we're not meant to keep the things we love. We're meant to let them become something greater than ourselves. The next few weeks passed in a blur of small moments. Emily's doctor appointments, knitting tiny socks, writing in my journal at night. Each day felt full in a way that didn't depend on anyone else. Then one morning, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was breathless. "Mrs. Merritt, it's time. We're at the hospital." My heart skipped. "Is she okay?" "She's fine," he said quickly. "Just nervous. She asked for you." Within minutes, I was out the door, purse in hand, barely remembering to lock the house behind me. The drive to the hospital felt both endless and too short. When I reached the maternity ward, Daniel was pacing in the hallway, his face pale with excitement. "She's inside," he said, pointing to the door. I walked in quietly. Emily was lying on the bed, her face flushed, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Mom," she whispered, reaching out her hand. I took it, my heart full. "I'm here." The next few hours passed in a blur of whispered encouragement, steady breathing, and quiet strength. When the cry finally came, small, sharp, perfect, the whole world seemed to stop. "It's a boy," the nurse said, smiling. Emily started crying, laughter and tears mixing together. "Thomas," she whispered. "His name is Thomas." I covered my mouth, the emotion too much to contain. "He's beautiful," I said softly, my voice breaking. When they placed the baby in her arms, everything else disappeared. The years of hurt, the distance, the silence, it all dissolved into that single shining moment. Later, when Emily was resting, Daniel handed the baby to me. His tiny fingers curled around mine, impossibly small and warm. "Hi there," I whispered. "Welcome home, sweetheart." The baby blinked, his eyes dark and curious. For a moment, I could almost see Thomas's smile there, faint but familiar. I sat with him for a long time, rocking gently in the chair by the window, the soft light of dawn spilling into the room. I thought of my husband, of all the things he'd missed, and yet somehow still felt a part of. When Emily woke, she smiled sleepily. "You're a natural," she said. I laughed softly. "It comes back to you, like riding a bike or loving someone." We stayed in the hospital 2 days. When Emily and the baby were finally released, I drove them home. Daniel carried the bags, and I carried the baby, my grandson, swaddled in the blanket I'd knitted. At home, I helped her settle him into the nursery. The walls were pale yellow, the same color as the yarn I'd chosen. There was a framed photo of her father on the dresser, his smile forever gentle. "You did a good job," I said quietly. "So did you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. That night, after they fell asleep, I sat in the living room holding a cup of tea, listening to the soft creak of the house and the distant sound of waves. The world felt still again, but not empty. It felt complete. When I returned home the next morning, I stopped by the charity house on my way. The garden had grown wild and beautiful, just as I'd asked. Flowers spilled over the edges, bees hummed lazily, and the air was heavy with the scent of lavender and salt. Sarah spotted me from the porch and waved. "Mrs. Merritt," she called. "How's your daughter?" I smiled, my heart still full. "She had a baby boy, Thomas." "Oh, congratulations," Sarah said, beaming. "You must be so proud." "I am," I said. "More than I can say." Before I left, I walked to the edge of the garden and knelt by the plaque that bore my name. I touched the smooth stone, feeling the warmth of the sun on it. "Another Thomas," I whispered. "The world could use a few more." When I stood, a soft breeze rustled the flowers, and I could have sworn I heard laughter, faint and familiar, carried from somewhere beyond the sea. That night, I wrote one more entry in my journal. Life has come full circle. What was once broken is whole again. What I let go of returned in ways I never imagined. Love doesn't end, it transforms. It waits patiently until you're ready to see it again. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the sound of the waves lull me to sleep. Outside, the garden shimmered under the moonlight, alive with color and memory. The world kept moving, soft, steady, and endlessly forgiving. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't dream of the past. I dreamed of tomorrow. The weeks after Thomas's birth moved slower, softer, like the tide retreating after a long storm. The house seemed brighter somehow. The air carried laughter again, the kind that had been missing for years. Every morning I'd wake to the sound of gulls and think of my grandson, a tiny heartbeat that had already mended so much. Emily called me almost every day. Sometimes she needed advice, how to soothe him when he wouldn't sleep, how to hold him just right, how to wash the baby clothes without shrinking them. Other times she just called to talk, her voice warm with exhaustion and love. One morning she said, "Mom, I can't wait for you to see him again. He's changing every day." I laughed. That's what babies do. They grow right before your eyes. A few days later, she brought him over. The moment she placed him in my arms, I felt something inside me shift. A gentle ache, the kind that feels like coming home. He looked up at me with wide, curious eyes, and for a heartbeat, I saw echoes of my husband in him. The same steady calm, the same hint of mischief. "He has your eyes," Emily said softly. "And your father's spirit," I replied, smiling. She smiled too, but there were tears in her eyes. "I never thought we'd have this again. This kind of peace." "Neither did I said quietly. "But sometimes peace finds you when you finally stop chasing it." That afternoon, we walked to the beach together. The sky was clear, the waves gentle. Emily spread a blanket on the sand, and we sat there watching the ocean stretch endlessly before us. I held baby Thomas close, feeling his tiny breath against my chest. "You know," I said, "your father used to bring you here every weekend. You'd dig holes in the sand, and he'd tell you they were treasure maps." Emily laughed softly. "I remember I used to think he actually buried gold coins." "Maybe he did," I said. "Maybe this, all of this, was his treasure all along." She reached over and touched my hand. "You kept it safe for him, Mom." The sun began to dip lower, the sky turning shades of orange and rose. The baby stirred in my arms, and I hummed a soft tune, an old lullaby Thomas used to sing to Emily when she couldn't sleep. For a moment, it felt like time had folded in on itself. The past, the present, and everything I'd lost now gathered into one small, perfect moment of peace. Later that evening, after they left, I lingered on the porch. The house was quiet again, but not empty. It was full of memory, of forgiveness, of life. The light from the kitchen spilled softly across the floor, glinting off the small pot of lavender that still sat on the windowsill. I made myself tea and sat in my favorite chair, the one that faced the ocean. The waves glowed faintly under the moonlight, each one breaking softly against the shore. I thought of everything that had led here. The hurt, the loss, the letting go, the healing. It all made sense now. Every step, even the painful ones, had led me back to love. I opened my journal one last time. The pages were nearly full, a year's worth of grief, lessons, and grace captured in ink. I flipped to the back and began to write. Today, I watched my daughter's son sleep in my arms. I saw in him the proof that nothing truly ends. Love simply changes form. What was once broken now breathes again, in new hands, in new hearts. I have lived long enough to learn that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without the pain. And maybe that's all the healing we ever need. I paused, then added, Thomas, if you ever read this one day, know that your grandmother once thought love was something to protect. But now I know love is something to give away, freely, even when it hurts. Because when you give love, it always finds its way back home. I closed the journal slowly and placed it on the shelf beside the old family photograph. Me, Thomas, and little Emily standing in front of the beach house, smiling against the wind. The edges were faded now, but the warmth in our faces was still there. Outside, a soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. "Evening, Mrs. Merritt," he said. I hope it's not too late." "Not at all," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." He hesitated. "I just wanted to thank you for everything, for forgiving me, for giving Emily back her mother." I smiled gently. "You gave her a reason to forgive, Daniel. That's worth something." He nodded, his eyes glassy. "She's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have both of you," I replied. When he left, I stood for a moment on the porch, the night air brushing my face. The stars shimmered above the horizon, bright and endless. I whispered a quiet thank you to the sky, to my husband, to the sea, to life itself. The next morning came with golden light. I woke early and baked a batch of blueberry muffins, the same recipe I'd made 1,000 times. I packed a few into a tin and walked down to the charity house. The garden was alive with color now, every flower in bloom. Sarah was there, trimming the roses. "Mrs. Merritt," she called. "You're early." "I brought something sweet," I said, smiling. As we sat on the porch, children ran past us, their laughter ringing through the air. A little boy paused by the garden and pointed at the plaque that bore my name. "Who's that?" he asked. Sarah smiled. "That's the lady who helped build this place." The boy looked up at me, eyes wide. "You built our house?" I chuckled softly. "No, sweetheart, I just gave it back to the world." He grinned and ran off again, his laughter echoing across the yard. I sat there for a long time after that, sipping tea, watching life unfold in all its small, perfect details. The children chasing each other, the women chatting softly, the sunlight flickering through the trees. It was everything I had hoped for and more. When I walked back home, I felt lighter than ever. The wind carried the scent of salt and lavender, and the ocean shimmered in the distance. On the porch, I paused and looked back once more at the horizon. The tide was rising again, waves folding gently over each other, just as they always had. I whispered softly, "Everything comes back home." Then I stepped inside, the door closing quietly behind me. That night, the stars hung bright over the sea, their reflection dancing across the water like 1,000 tiny promises. The house was still, the world peaceful. And as I lay down to rest, the final thought that drifted through my mind was simple, quiet, and full of grace. Love never leaves, it just changes rooms. Outside, the tide kept rolling, steady, eternal, carrying the past, the present, and the promise of all that was still to come.